Good morning, dear students. I hope you all are fine at your home and enjoying the period of lockdown with study and too many other things with your family. As you can see on your screen, today we are here with a new lesson that is from your supplementary book, and that is the first chapter, A Triumph of Surgery. This chapter is written by James Herriot, who was a British veterinary surgeon. Veterinary means a person who treats animals, a doctor of animals, we can say that. So in this story, he himself is acting as a veterinary doctor. Is that clear now? So at first we will try to understand the title. As you can see, the triumph of surgery. A triumph of surgery. Triumph means victory, and surgery means, as you know, that it is an act which is performed in an hospital to to treat a patient. Okay, at first we will try to understand the lesson. There is a small introduction. Tricky is a small dog, is pampered and overfed by his rich mistress. He falls seriously ill, and his mistress consults a veterinary surgeon. Does he perform an operation? Does the dog recover? That is the important question we will find out in this story. So, there are some questions for you to find out. First one, why is Mrs. Pumphrey worried about Tricky? Second question is, what does she do to help him? Is she wise in this? And the third one, who does I refer in this story? As I have already told you, you have already got the answer of the third question, that I is the narrator himself, the writer himself, James Herriot, who himself is a veterinary doctor. Now we are starting the test. I was really worried about Tricky this time. I had pulled up my car when I saw him in the street with his mistress, and I was shocked at his appearance. He had become hugely fat, like a bloated sausage, with a leg at each corner. His eyes, bloodshot and rheumy, stared straight ahead, and his tongue lolled from his jaws. There are some difficult words, as you can see highlighted there. The first word is bloated. Bloated means excessive in size or amount, means something very huge. And second one, as you know, sausage. Sausage is a food item which is in cylindrical shape. Now next one, that is bloodshot. Bloodshot means red eyes. And the fourth one is rheumy. Rheumy means watery. And next one is lolled. Lolled. Lolled means lazy or relax. Okay, now we will try to understand its meaning now. In this very first paragraph, the narrator starts telling us that how he was worried about Tricky, which was a dog, a fat dog. The narrator, he is himself Mr. Herriot, stops his car as he sees Tricky with his mistress on a road. As the narrator is shocked to see Tricky because he looks like a bloated sausage. He was become very fat. The color of the eyes of the dog were red and watery. Now the second one. Mrs. Pumphrey hastened to explain he was so listless, Mr. Herriot. He seemed to have no energy. I thought he must be suffering from malnutrition, so I have been giving him some little extra between meals to build him up, some malt and cod liver oil and bowl of Horlicks at night to make him sleep, nothing much really. In this second paragraph, Mrs. Pumphrey is explaining to Mr. Harriet that she used to give him different kinds of foods because she thought that Tricky was malnourished. She told him that she used to give him malt, cod liver oil, a bowl of Horlicks at night, apart from his regular meals, so that he could sleep at night. But as you can see, although she gave him so much to eat, she says that she doesn't give him much to eat. That is the strange thing. She was unable to understand her mistake. Now what happens next? And did you cut down on the sweet things as I told you? Then she replied, oh, I did for a bit, but he seemed to be so weak I had to relent. He does love cream, cakes, and chocolates, so I can't bear to refuse him. I looked down again at the little dog. That was a trouble. Tricky's only fault was greed. He was never been known to refuse food. He would tackle a meal at any hour of the day or night. I wondered about all the things Mrs. Pumphrey hadn't mentioned. Are you giving him plenty of exercise? The narrator asked to her. Well, he has his little walks with me, as you can see, but Hawkin, the gardener, had been down with lumbago, so there has been no ring throwing lately. So there are some word meanings. There is a word relent, as you can see highlighted here. Relent means less severe, means which is not very much attentive every time. And there is a word at last, lumbago. It means pain of muscles. So we will try to understand this paragraph. What happens in that one? The narrator asked her if she had cut down his sweets as she used to give her, but she replies that she didn't. Actually, she says that she did it for some while, but she felt that he was getting weaker, because of which she had to stop being so harsh with him. She says that she is unable to refuse him cakes and chocolates, as those were his favorite things. Then the narrator asked her, and he has also understood the Tricky's problem. The dog was very greedy and could eat any time of the day or night. He did not know how to say no to the food when his stomach was full. The narrator also thought to himself of all the things that Mrs. Pumphrey would not have mentioned which she fed Tricky. Means that he have understood, the narrator of the story, James Harriet, has understood that Mrs. Pumphrey used to give him different kinds of food. That is why he has got a shape like this. Again, the narrator asked Mrs. Pumphrey whether Tricky was exercising, to which Mrs. Pumphrey replies that she does take him out for walks once in a while, but he is not playing his ring throwing exercise, as the gardener who takes him out to play is not coming these days because of pain in his lower back, as we have already studied in the paragraph that lumbago means pain of muscles, means the gardener was suffering from the pain of muscles. That is why the gardener was unable to make him go for outing. Now we will move to the next page. As you can see here, the picture of Tricky is really looking like a bloated sausage. Now next one, I tried to sound severe. Now I really mean this. If you don't cut his food right down and give him more exercise, he is going to be really ill. You must harden your heart and keep him on a very strict diet. Now, the narrator is making him explain that this is the time she has to cut down the food of the dog, otherwise, he will become ill. She has to be strict about his diet. Now, the next one, Mrs. Pumphrey wrung her hands. Oh, I will, Mr. Harriet, I am sure you are right, but it is so difficult, so very difficult. She set off head down along the road as if determined to put the new regime into practice immediately. So, what happens in this one? Mrs. Pumphrey wrung her hands and she said to Mr. Harriet that sure I will try to do that, and she herself knows that it is very difficult to do so. She has already tried that, but she was unable to cut down the food of her dog. And after that she moved towards the different direction, and this time it was looking like that Mrs. Pumphrey is very much determined to start a new practice of cutting down the food of that dog, which was becoming very fat. Okay, now we will move to the next one. I watched their progress with growing concern. Tricky was tottering along his little tweed coat. He had a whole wardrobe of these coats for a cold weather and a raincoat for the wet days. He struggled on, drooping in his harness. I thought it wouldn't be long before I heard from Mrs. Pumphrey. In this paragraph, Mr. Harriet is watching them go and looking at Tricky's walking steadily. The narrator was also looking at the tweed coat that Tricky was wearing. He had a wardrobe full of these coats and also raincoat for the rainy days. This line also suggests that Mrs. Pumphrey was a rich lady and she had a lot of money to spend on her dog. But the narrator knew that soon he would be receiving a call about Tricky's falling ill, and it came. As you can see in the next paragraph, the expected call came within a few days, means that the narrator was expecting a call from Mrs. Pumphrey. Mrs. Pumphrey was distraught. Tricky would eat nothing, refused even his favorite dishes, and besides, he had bouts of vomiting. He spent all his time lying on a rug, panting, didn't want to go for a walk, didn't want to do anything. As Mr. Harriet knows that Mrs. Pumphrey is definitely going to call him, he was expected because he knows that Mrs. Pumphrey is not going to cut down his food. But the narrator knew that soon he would be receiving a call about Tricky's falling ill, and then the call came. The call came after a few days. Mrs. Pumphrey was very upset as Tricky was not eating anything, not even his favorite dishes, and was vomiting frequently. He didn't even want to do anything. Now the next one. I had made my plans in advance. The only way was to get Tricky out of the house for a period. I suggested that he be hospitalized for about a fortnight to be kept under observation. Fortnight means a period of 15 days. Now the doctor was very intelligent. He knows that the news is definitely going to come that Pumphrey is ill now. So he has already made some advance plans about it, and the plan was to take out that dog from Mrs. Pumphrey's house for about fortnight, means 50 for the period of 15 days under his observation. The poor lady almost swooned. She was sure he would pine and die if he die not see her every day. And when the dog was very ill, Mrs. Pumphrey was very much worried about him. If she will not see him, and she was also thinking that the dog is definitely going to die. But I took a firm line. Tricky was very ill, and this was the only way to save him. In fact, I thought it best to take him without delay, and followed by Mrs. Pumphrey wailing, I marched out to the car carrying the little dog wrapped in a blanket. The narrator told Mrs. Pumphrey that this was the only option, as Tricky was very ill. The narrator thought it would be best to avoid any delays and get him to the hospital as soon as possible. He went to their house, and even though Mrs. Pumphrey was crying because she didn't want her dog to go away from her, he took the dog wrapped in a blanket and put him in the car. He means the narrator. And who is the narrator? The writer of the story. Now the next one. The entire staff was roused and maids rushed in and out, bringing his day bed, his night bed, favorite cushions, toys and rubber rings, breakfast bowl, lunch bowl, super bowl. Realizing that my car would never hold all the stuff, I started to drive away. As I moved off, Mrs. Pumphrey, with a despairing cry, threw an armful of the little coats through the window. I looked in the mirror before I turned the corner of the drive. Everybody was in tears. Out of the road, I glanced down at the pathetic little animal gasping on the seat by my side. I patted the head, and Tricky made a brave effort to wag his tail. Poor old lad, I said, you haven't a kick in you, but I think I know a cure for you. So what happens when the narrator was carrying the dog to his hospital? The maids were then woken up and asked to get out all the Tricky's stuff, whatever the Tricky was using at home, and the maids were asked to get out all this stuff. His stuff included things like his day bed, his night bed, favorite cushions, toys, rubber things, breakfast bowl, lunch bowl, and his snack bowl. Mr. Harriet knew that so much stuff won't be fit in his car. So he started rushing things. Rush means to do things fast. As the doctor was leaving with Tricky, Mrs. Pumphrey threw a lot of coats that Tricky used to wear in the car. As the narrator was turning the car on the turn, he saw through the rear mirror, means the mirror which was showing the area from the back side, the rear mirror, that everyone was crying, means everyone of that house, means the maids, Mrs. Pumphrey, everyone was crying. He petted the little helpless animal, who responded by wagging his tail. The narrator then thought and told Tricky that he knew that Tricky did not have any energy, but surely he has the power to get rid and to become well.